There comes a moment in every man's life when the world he thought he understood begins to crack. It happens slowly at first. Maybe after a breakup that makes no sense. Maybe after years of feeling unseen, unappreciated, or constantly misunderstood. Maybe after realizing that everything he was taught about women, what they want, how they think, how love works, was built on sand. And in that strange silence, after the confusion and heartbreak, something deeper begins to stir. A terrifying but liberating question. What if I never actually understood women at all? Nietzsche once said, women. They make the highs higher and the lows more frequent. It was both a confession and a warning. His writings are often dismissed as cynical or even misogynistic, but beneath the surface lies a deeper insight, not about women alone, but about how painfully slow men are to understand the inner world of the feminine. Not because women are a mystery, but because men are often taught to look at them through the wrong lens. For most men, understanding women doesn't begin in youth. It begins in failure, in heartbreak, in the slow burn of disillusionment. And by the time they finally begin to grasp the emotional complexity, psychological nuance, and spiritual depth of the feminine, decades have passed, its opportunities lost, its innocence burned away. This is not a modern problem. Tease. This is not about dating apps or hookup culture, okay? This is not just about alpha males or nice guys or bad communication skills. No, this dilemma is ancient. It's from the Greek myths of Medea and Pandora to the mystic poetry of Rumi and Hafiz. The male psyche has always struggled to comprehend the wild, unpredictable force of the feminine, and has often paid the price for misunderstanding it. And yet, this isn't a story of blame. This is a story of awakening. Because when a man finally stops projecting what he wants to see in a woman and starts observing who she really is, without fear, without fantasy, without the need to control, something incredible happens. He doesn't just understand women, he begins to understand himself. This video is not about dating advice. It's not about tricks or tactics. It's about something far more important. The long-delayed psychological education of the modern man. I journey into the emotional, historical, and philosophical shadows where Nietzsche once wandered, to uncover the truths men only seem to learn after it's too late. So let's ask the questions no one wants to ask. Let's explore the uncomfortable. Let's challenge what we think we know about women, about ourselves, and about the stories we've inherited. Because if Nietzsche was right, then only when a man is brave enough to walk into his own blindness, he began to see. Throughout history, men have stood in awe of the feminine and misunderstood it in equal measure. From the very beginning, cultures across the world have crafted myths, legends, and doctrines that painted women as both sacred and dangerous. In ancient Greece, Pandora was created as a punishment to men. Beauty was a gift, but her curiosity unleashed suffering upon the world. In Christianity, it was Eve who tempted Adam. In Hindu mythology, Kali, the fierce mother goddess, embodies both destruction and creation. The message that woman is mystery, woman is chaos, woman is temptation, power, and pain. But these stories were never just about women. They were reflections of how men processed their own emotional world, or, more often, avoided it. Because the truth is, many societies were not built to help men understand women. They were built to control them. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this dynamic and challenged it in his provocative way. He wrote, "When a woman has scholarly inclinations, there is usually something wrong with her sexuality. It is easy to dismiss that as cruelty. But look deeper." Nietzsche wasn't just mocking women. He was exposing how men, fearing the full expression of female power, labeled it as unnatural. He saw something many philosophers before him refused to confront, that the male fear of the feminine is deeply psychological, that it springs from insecurity, not strength, and that most men's education, if we can even call it that, about women is tainted by cultural propaganda. personal fear, and unconscious projection. In medieval Europe, women were either virgins or witches. In Confucian China, they were obedient daughters or seductive threats to order. Even in modern times, mainstream media has reduced women to two-dimensional archetypes: the cool girl, the seductress, the emotional wreck, the mother figure. And men, generation after generation, have consumed these scripts without questioning them. But here's the paradox. Even as men sought to dominate or idealize women, they secretly longed for something more. A deeper connection, a real understanding. And time again, that longing was sabotaged by the very myths they believed in. Carl Jung, a century after Nietzsche, would go on to say, "Every man carries within him the eternal image of woman. Not the image of this or that woman, but a definite feminine image." He called it the anima, the internal feminine. And this idea changes everything, because it means the way a man sees women is shaped not just by women themselves, but by his own psyche, his childhood experiences, his mother, his wounds, his culture, his shame. And most men are never taught to examine any of this. So they walk through life chasing an illusion, expecting women to be something they're not, projecting needs onto them that they themselves have not explored. And the price of this unconsciousness is staggering. It leads to cycles of resentment, confusion, broken relationships, emotional numbness. It leads to men feeling powerless in the face of female autonomy. It leads to frustration when women refuse to play the roles society once forced them into. And worst of all, it leads to men not only misunderstanding women, but misunderstanding their own capacity for emotional depth, intuition, and vulnerability. The tragedy is not just that men learn about women too late. The tragedy is that they're never shown how to learn, how to observe without projecting, how to love without possessing, how to engage with the feminine without fear or control. Nietzsche, with all his provocations and brutal honesty, was trying to drag this conversation into the light. He knew the consequences of a man who cannot see the feminine, within or without. He becomes cold, rigid, bitter. He may achieve power, but not connection. He may conquer the world, but never know intimacy. And in that sense, Nietzsche was not attacking women. He was warning men. Today, this dynamic continues. Despite all our progress, many men still live in psychological exile from the feminine. They admire women, desire women, fear women, but rarely understand them. This video is a step toward breaking that exile, toward seeing clearly not just women, but the emotional blindness that has been passed from father to son, culture to culture, century after century. Because only when we understand the past can we begin to dismantle the illusions it has handed us: the anima, the mirror, and the mask. Most men are not taught how to feel, let alone how to understand a woman. They are taught to achieve, to suppress, to fix, to desire, but not to sit with emotional complexity, not to interpret silence, not to recognize nuance, and certainly not to reflect on how their own inner world shapes their perception of others, especially of women. This is where Carl Jung's idea of the anima becomes deeply relevant. The anima is the internal feminine presence within a man's psyche, a composite of emotion, creativity, intuition, and connection. It is built through early experiences with women, a nurturing or absent mother, a loving or emotionally unavailable partner. The cultural ideals absorbed in media and mythology. But here is the danger. When a man is not aware of his anima, he doesn't integrate it. He projects it. He sees women not as they are, but as reflections of his unconscious needs. He may fall in love with a woman not because of who she is, but because she mirrors back the emotional parts of himself he has long denied. She becomes a symbol, a dream, a savior, a curse, anything but a full human being. And so begins the tragic dance. The more disconnected a man is from his inner feminine, the more power he gives to women outside of him to complete him, and the more disappointed, angry, or disillusioned he becomes when they do not. In modern psychology, this projection is not just spiritual, it's neurological. The human brain is wired to simplify complexity. We fill in the blanks, we assume, we judge quickly based on past patterns. In relationships, this can be disastrous. What starts as infatuation can quickly turn into confusion. Why is she pulling away? Why can't I understand her? Why does she change? But here's the truth. She isn't changing. Your illusion is collapsing. And that collapse can feel like betrayal, not because she lied to you, but because you were in love with a mask socially. This dynamic is amplified by cultural scripts. Men are told to be stoic, emotionally detached, sexually driven, and dominant. Women, meanwhile, are often socialized to be expressive, emotionally attuned, and relational. This mismatch creates a psychological chasm. Men long for emotional depth, but lack the tools to reach it. Women long for presence and understanding, but often encounter defensiveness or emotional absence. Nietzsche saw this tension and translated it into uncomfortable truths. He once wrote, "Woman was God's second mistake." As harsh as it sounds, that line wasn't about women. It was about man's inability to deal with the feminine, his frustration, his projection, his inner chaos. When read through a modern lens, Nietzsche was not demonizing women. He was diagnosing the fractured male psyche. What men learn late is that understanding women requires a confrontation with the self, with vulnerability, with shadow, with the parts of the soul they've ignored to survive. You cannot understand the feminine if you fear emotion. You cannot connect with a woman if you despise your own softness. You cannot receive her truth if you are still living inside your own fantasy. The feminine in women, in nature, in your own heart, is not a problem to solve. She is a mirror, and she will reflect back everything you refuse to face. And so, the question is not just, how do I understand women? The deeper question is, am I willing to understand myself? The cost of not seeing her, and yourself, when a man misunderstands women. He doesn't just lose her, he loses parts of himself, because at the core of this misunderstanding lies a deeper fracture. The inability to hold emotional truth without collapsing into fear, control, or silence. And over time, this fracture grows. It invades his relationships, his career, his self-worth, and his very sense of identity. Let's begin with the emotional cost. Many men carry a silent, heavy grief, a grief they do not know how to name. It is not the grief of loss, but of never having truly connected. They move from relationship to relationship, thinking this one will be different, only to find the same confusion rising again. They feel alone, even when loved. They feel abandoned, even when chosen. Why? Because you cannot feel intimacy through projection. You can only feel it through presence, and presence demands emotional literacy. The ability to hold discomfort, to witness complexity, to listen without fixing. When a man cannot meet a woman emotionally, he loses access to her deeper truth. She withdraws, she protects herself, and he interprets this as betrayal, not realizing it was his disconnection that pushed her away. The result? Resentment, emotional numbness. A quiet rage that turns inward or outward. In Nietzsche's time, this manifested as existential frustration. He never married. His romantic life was marked by rejection, especially by Lou Andreas, a brilliant woman who challenged his ideals and rejected his advances. Some say he never recovered. His later writings dripped with bitterness, but also profound insight. He knew the cost of emotional blindness because he lived it. And in today's world, the same cost continues. It just wears modern clothes. Men who fear female emotional power often retreat into overachievement, addiction, hyper-independence, or intellectual arrogance. They replace connection with control, vulnerability with performance. Instead of learning the language of the heart, they double down on logic, status, or bravado. But deep inside, there is a hunger, not just for a woman's body, but for her essence, for her mystery, for her truth. And when that hunger is unmet, or worse, misunderstood, it turns into despair. We see this in the epidemic of lonely men, in rising rates of suicide, in the emotional suppression that starts in boyhood and calcifies into manhood. We see it in marriages where the man feels like a stranger in his own home, in breakups where he never really knew what went wrong, in lives where love was always just out of reach, not because it wasn't offered, but because it wasn't recognized. And on the other side of that pain is the woman who feels unseen, flattened into a role, expected to soothe, to stay small, to carry the emotional weight of the relationship alone. She senses when a man wants her to be something for him instead of simply being with her. And slowly, quietly, she disappears, emotionally first, then physically. In mythology, this is the story of Psyche and Eros. When Psyche breaks the rule and looks at Eros by candlelight, she is cast out, not because she was evil, but because she sought truth before it was time. The lesson: that love cannot survive without emotional maturity. So what happens when men never grow up emotionally? What happens when they confuse control for connection? What happens when they finally see what they lost after it's already gone? The answer is heartbreak, but not just romantic heartbreak, existential heartbreak. The realization that you lived your life through a mask, that you were searching for something in her you hadn't yet found in yourself. But here's the hidden gift: pain can be a teacher. Heartbreak can be initiation. Loss can be the beginning of vision. And if a man is willing, truly willing, to feel that pain without running, numbing, or blaming, then the very wound that once separated him from the feminine could become the bridge back to it. Learning to see practices that awaken the inner eye. If misunderstanding women leads to suffering, then learning to truly see them and yourself is an act of healing. But let's be clear, this is not about becoming perfect. It's not about decoding some eternal female seeker. It's about becoming present, awake, emotionally fluent, spiritually alive. And that journey begins not with her, but with you. 1. Shadow work, and journaling. Begin by asking the hardest question: what have I projected onto women? This isn't easy. It requires honest, uncomfortable reflection. Shadow work, a process called Young, made famous, is about confronting the unconscious parts of yourself you've disowned. Jealousy, neediness, control, fear of abandonment, the desire to be saved. Write them down. Track the patterns. Who hurt you? Who did you idolize? Who did you try to fix? Or who did you expect to fix you? Use journaling as a daily practice, not for answers, but for awareness. Ask yourself, what do I fear most in intimacy? When have I demanded emotional labor without offering it? Where have I mistaken emotional distance for strength? Awareness is the first crack in the illusion. 2. Reclaiming the anima through creativity. Men who neglect their emotional and intuitive side often lose access to creativity. Reconnecting with your anima means embracing art, music, poetry, storytelling, not to perform, but to feel, create, without judging yourself. Paint something. Write a love letter you never sent. Learn to sit with beauty without needing to own it, because the feminine, whether in a woman or in your own soul, cannot be forced. She must be invited. Creativity is the language of the soul. When you speak it, the inner woman, your anima, begins to trust you again. 3. Emotional regulation and presence practices. Women don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be here. That means learning to regulate your emotions. When she's overwhelmed, can you stay grounded instead of reacting? When she withdraws, can you stay open instead of controlling? Emotional presence is not passive. It's a discipline. Start with simple breath work, 5 minutes a day. Observe your body. Notice where tension hides. Practice sitting in emotional discomfort without running. The next time a woman brings up something hard, try this. Don't fix it. Don't flee. Just feel with her. That's where trust begins. Don't just study women through men's voices. Not Nietzsche, not Jung, not even me. Read the journals of N.A. Nin. Listen to Clarissa Pinkola absorb the poetry of Nayirowadi. Watch how women speak about themselves when no one is interrupting. And don't argue with what you hear. Listen to understand. Not to win, not to respond, not to reinterpret. Just listen. You'll begin to notice something subtle but powerful. A whole inner world that has always been there. Complex, rich, and vibrantly alive, waiting for you to drop the mask and enter it with humility. 5. Spiritual integration. Stoicism meets Sufism. From the Stoics, take the discipline of internal mastery. Don't let external chaos define your inner world. But from the Sufis, take the reverence for mystery and the surrender to love. As Rumi wrote, woman is a ray of God. She is not just the beloved. She is the creator. In that line is your task, not to possess the feminine, but to honor it, to integrate it within, to love with strength and softness, to lead with presence, not control. These practices aren't boxes to check. They are doorways, and behind each doorway is a more whole version of you. Not just a better man in relationship to women, but a better man in relationship to life. Because when you finally stop trying to fix the feminine, start learning from it, you don't just connect more deeply with women. You come home to yourself. What he sees when it's almost too late. There's a moment in the life of every thinking man, often late, often after pain, when he sits in silence and realizes, I never really saw her. Not the woman who loved him, not the woman he chased, not the woman he lost. He saw his hopes, his wounds, his projections, but not her inner world, not her humanity, not her freedom. And in that moment of realization, something breaks and something heals. Nietzsche, for all his sharp edges, glimpsed this too. Behind his cynicism was a man who had been touched and wounded by a woman he could never possess. His heartbreak didn't just scar him, it revealed him. It stripped him of illusion. It opened his philosophical eye to the unconscious games we play between the sexes. The tragedy is not that men are doomed to fail in love. The tragedy is that they're often taught to enter love blindfolded, with no emotional education, no inner preparation, no reverence for the feminine as something to learn from, not conquer. But here's the truth. It is never too late to learn. It's pain, if you let it, becomes a teacher more powerful than any textbook. Loss, if you don't run from it, becomes a mirror. And heartbreak, when faced with honesty, becomes an initiation into emotional maturity. You begin to see that the feminine is not a puzzle to be solved, but a force to be witnessed. That love is not something you earn by being good enough, but something you receive by being present enough. That a woman does not want your perfection. She wants your truth. And perhaps most importantly, you realize that the woman you sought outside was always pointing to the woman within, your anima, your emotional soul, your forgotten mirror. To truly understand women, a man must first understand the places in himself that have been silenced, shamed, or ignored. He must meet his vulnerability, not as a weakness, but as a compass. He must learn to feel, not to control, and to love without needing to possess. In doing so, he doesn't just become a better lover, he becomes whole. And from that wholeness, everything begins to change. So, if you're a man listening to this, maybe a little older, maybe carrying the weight of past mistakes, know this. You are not broken. You were just taught to see with half-closed eyes. But vision can be reclaimed. The heart can reopen, and what was missed before can still be honored now. If something in you stirred while watching this, if an old heartbreak surfaced, or a quiet truth whispered, then you are not alone. We are all, in some way, unlearning the myths we were handed. We are all returning to what we once ignored. And, for many men, this journey begins not in strength, but in surrender. This channel is not here to give you tricks. is not about performance, pickup, or pretending to be someone you're not. It's about waking up, emotionally, spiritually, historically. It's about seeing how the past shaped us and how we can shape ourselves differently going forward. We blend deep psychology with ancient wisdom, personal reflection with collective history. Because the truth is, you cannot separate your story from the stories of those who came before you. Ki, Jung, Rumi, the myths of old, they all echo in your relationships today. They whisper lessons men have long avoided, but you are here now. And that means something has already begun to shift. So if you're ready to continue this journey, to explore not just women, but your own untapped depth, your emotional blueprint, your hidden power, subscribe. Join a growing space of thoughtful souls, choosing depth over distraction, wholeness over performance, truth over illusion. Together, we ask the hard questions. We face what hurts. We reclaim what was never taught. Because this is not just about understanding women. It's about becoming the kind of man who no longer needs to project, perform, or pretend. It's about becoming someone who can see fully, clearly, and compassionately. And maybe, just maybe, it's what she was waiting for all along. We're not here to chase perfection, we're here to remember who we are. Let's walk that path together.